All right, let's look at Chapter 3, which is patient census. And what I'm going to do in this video is talk about the terminology, talk about the formulas, but I'm also going to do some demonstration with Excel. Some of us might not be as comfortable with Excel as others, so I want to take a little bit of time to explain how to create formulas in Excel. None of these formulas are going to be major difficult. They're basically addition, division, but I do want to explain how the formulas using Excel can help us as we're doing our assignments. Now, I am starting on page 31. This is talking about inpatient census, and we do census calculations to help us determine usage. Are we using our resources adequately? Do we have a justification for additional resources? So these numbers are constantly being looked at by administrators and managers to determine, do we have sufficient staffing? Do we need more staffing? Do we have too much staffing? Are we utilizing our facilities to the maximum? If we're not, maybe we need to do a little bit of advertising and marketing. I mean, hospitals are similar to businesses in that, you know, we make choices about which hospitals we use. Now, of course, in an emergency situation, we might not, but there's certain hospitals we may decide I'd rather not go to that one. So hospitals need to do a certain amount of marketing and advertising for their facilities. So, you know, they are a business in that sense. But anyway, getting back to inpatient census, look at the definition of this. It indicates the number of patients present in the healthcare facility at a particular point in time. And they talk about in the book that you don't just do inpatient census at any time. It needs to be a consistent time, and it needs to be a time where everybody is basically not moving from place to place. So it's not going to be at 8 or 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning when there's a lot of movement going on. Patients are being transferred, patients are being discharged, patients coming in. It's going to typically be, you know, somewhere around midnight, that sort of time. So it is a consistent time, and it's at a very low movement activity point in the day. Okay, but it needs to be at a consistent point in time. Okay. We also do inpatient census based on a particular department, what we call a patient care unit. And the patient care unit is PCU, as it is abbreviated. That's discussed on the top of page 32. We also need to make sure you're familiar with terms like admission date, the day that the patient first enters the hospital as an inpatient. That's not going to be if they're in the ER, if they have been admitted as an inpatient, and there is a difference. There's a difference between an inpatient and someone there that's for observation. The discharge day is the day the patient leaves the hospital. Also, we have to sometimes deal with what we call inter-hospital transfers, where a patient leaves one hospital and goes to another hospital. We also have to deal with what's called intra-hospital transfers, and that means that a patient might go from one PCU, remember that's patient care unit, to another patient care unit within the same facility. So we have to keep up with all of this information. Now, see if I'm ready to, yeah. So patient or daily inpatient census, this includes the number of inpatients present on the PCU, patient care unit, at the census taking time each day, and any inpatients who were both admitted after the census taking time and discharged before the next census taking time. So what I want to do is, looking at page 34, I want to bring up a spreadsheet and look at the formula. And I am looking at, let me make sure where I'm at, exercise, 3-1. Remember, you are typically assigned the even numbers. I'm not going to do those for you. Those are part of your assignment. But the odd numbers are highly recommended, and the answers are in the back of the book. So what I want to do is take this particular spreadsheet, and I'm going to do the formula for it. Now, of course, I can take my calculator and I can add and subtract as needed to get my answer. But what we want to do is get some experience with working in Excel. All formulas start with the equal symbol in Excel. And what my formula needs to be is my starting inpatient census plus my admissions plus my admitted and discharged in the same day, minus any discharges where they were not admitted on the same day. So therefore, I'm going to take cell B2 plus B3 plus B4 minus B5. And even though B5 is 0, I'm going to include it in my formula in case at some point I go back and change that to a 1 or 2 or however many, it'll then calculate in. If I neglected to put that minus B5 in the formula, well, then my number changed, it wouldn't automatically calculate in. So when I touch the enter key, I get 114. Okay. All right, so pretty simple. And again, you can compare your results to the answers in the back of the book. So that's how you do a formula in Excel. Now, could I have literally typed in equal B2 plus B3? Yeah, but I use the point and click method where I click on the cell and then apply what we call the operator being the plus symbol, the minus symbol, the division symbol, multiplication symbol, okay? All right, now let's focus on inpatient service days, and let me back up a minute. Exercise 3-1 at the bottom of page 33 had us do the calculation, okay? Let me make sure. Yeah, so let's look at exercise 3-1. A PCU has a count of 20 patients on September 1st, 30 patients at the same time on September 2nd. Could the counts have been different if the PCU had taken the census at 12:01 on both days? Yeah, they could have, because something could have occurred during that difference in time. So take some time to go through those questions and answer them. Seeing if there's one where I can do a calculation. Yeah, so those are just kind of comparison questions. All right, let's look at what we call daily inpatient census. And when we talk about daily inpatient census, this includes the number of patients present on the PCU, patient care unit, at the census taking time each day in any inpatients who were both admitted after the census taking time and discharged before the next census taking time. So I want to encourage you to, in these spreadsheets, follow the wording carefully, and that will help you focus on the number that you need to put in those cells. Okay. All right. Now, as far as homework, you'll have to do exercise 3-2. So you're going to do some calculations there, and of course your spreadsheet will have those calculations or the numbers already built in, and basically all you have to do is provide the calculation. And again, remember that all formulas begin with the equal symbol, so be careful there. And again, don't just place a number in the cell. You need the experience of using Excel to its potential to learn how to do formulas, okay? Now, I kind of did, I was in my spreadsheet that I brought up a minute ago, I've kind of already done number 1 for you, okay? So that one's in there. And then, of course, you've got to do 3.2.3, 3.2.4, and 3.2.5. So make sure you're doing those calculations, okay? All right, inpatient service days. Now, changing gears here a little bit. Up to this point, I've been talking about people. Now, when we talk about inpatient service days, we're talking about services only. In other words, the potential for the services that we can provide. So it says an inpatient service day is a unit of measure denoting the services received by one patient in one 24-hour period. The 24-hour period is the time between the census taking hours on 2 successive days. One inpatient service day is counted for each inpatient admission when a patient is admitted and discharged in the same day. So what's different about inpatient census is that now we're counting that person that was admitted and discharged in the same day, where we didn't count that before. We remember we subtracted that. So now we're talking about the services that we are providing to our patients. So be careful about, okay, are we calculating inpatient census, or are we calculating inpatient service day? Now, when we talk about the inpatient service day, we're talking about, and this is the key word, services. Okay, so be careful about that. Now, if we look at let me get back to where I'm going. Okay, so if we look at the spreadsheet at the top of page 36, we see that our formula is going to be that our inpatient census is going to then add the admissions, not discharge the same day. We're going to add the admitted and discharged the same day, and then we're going to subtract the discharges. So it is similar, it's just that the word inpatient service days is now different. Now, in the middle of page 36, get to where I need to be. Before I move on, let's look at some more information or bullet points about inpatient service days. It says 1 unit of 1 service day is not usually divided or reported as a fraction of a day. The day of admission is counted as an inpatient service day, but the day of discharge is not. The days a patient does not occupy a bed due to leave of absence are excluded because he or she is not present at the inpatient taking hour. Remember, we're talking about services. So therefore, if a patient leaves the facility for a day, for whatever reason, they're not counted for that day. Adults and children are calculated separately from newborns because adults and children typically need more services than, say, a newborn would need. So we typically do not count those together unless the hospital wants it done that way. Now, if we look at page 36 in the middle, make sure I've covered everything with inpatient service days. Oh, they call this, in addition, our textbook primarily calls it inpatient service days, but it could be patient day, inpatient day, bed occupancy day, census day. So that word day, when you see that, think of service, okay? So be careful there. When we talk about just census, we're talking about people. When we use that word day on the end, we're talking about services. Now, total inpatient service days, basically we're taking the inpatient service days per day and adding them up. So, you know, we could be calculating that per month, per quarter, per year, and we simply add those up. So if you look at the middle of page 36, they're calculating what looks like the first 10 days of June, and we end up with 707 inpatient service days. Again, that represents who we served in a 10-day period. All right, calculation of inpatient service days. Over on page 37, let's begin talking about this. This is a measurement of services received by all inpatients in one 24-hour period. This includes patients admitted and discharged on the same day because they receive services. Day of admission is counted as an inpatient service day, but day of discharge is not. You can't count both of those. You have to count one or the other. So be careful about that. Now, before I move on, I want us to look at page 37. And when we talk about calculation of inpatient service days, that little section there at the bottom of page 37, we're looking at the overall level of activity. We're looking at services. We're looking at the activity. So let's run through the formula that we have there. It says the number of patients in the hospital at 12:01 on November 1st. That's a census, okay, 257. But the number of patients admitted on November 1st. So there were 45 patients added that day. So we're up to 302, minus the number of patients discharged on November 1st. So we take those away, 24. So now we're down to 278, plus the number of patients both admitted and discharged on November 1st, and that would be 4. So they came and went on that same day, so they would not have been in either census at 12:01 a.m., but we had to count them because we provided them services. They were admitted and discharged. Maybe they were admitted at 8 a.m. and then, you know, improved through the day, so the physician decided to discharge them that evening. So they didn't make that 12:01 census, but again, we needed to include them. So that brings us up to 282. Okay, now over on page 38, there's a table there where we look at actual and budgeted. So all facilities have to make a budget, what they anticipate. They look closely at past numbers and then budget for what's going to happen in the next year. And so what you're seeing here is just what actually happened in the medicine service area and what they budgeted for. So therefore they came in under the budgeted, which was 1,238. The prior year was 15,608. So their actual prior year was minus 1,846. Okay, so just some little calculations that help us look at budgeting and whether we're coming in or over budget. For example, with the ICU, we actually had more patients than we had budgeted for. Okay. All right. Now, look at the middle of page 38 where we talk about newborns. And remember, newborns are typically not calculated in the same category as adults/children. But newborns, we need to look at the definition of this, are defined to be an inpatient who was born in the hospital. Now, if a child is born in the hospital, they're considered a newborn. If they leave the hospital and have to be admitted, let's say a month later, they're not classified as a newborn anymore, okay? All right, there's an important table on page 39 with all these abbreviations that you need to be familiar with because you're going to see these in a lot of your spreadsheets. When you see AC, that's adult and children. When you see NB, that's newborns. TRF is intra-hospital transfers. DIS is discharged. And then when you see A/D, don't confuse that with A/C. That is admitted and discharged on the same day. Also, if you see TX, that could be a transfer. Also, DC could be a discharge. So sometimes you'll see those abbreviations. So that table on the top of page 39 is an important table that you may need to refer back to as you're using spreadsheets like what you're seeing there in the middle of page 39 with all the AC and the NB, and it starts running together. So you have to be really careful that you're paying attention to those headings and not getting yourself confused. All right. Now, okay. Let's take a minute. I'm on page 39, and I want to take just a moment to go through the bulleted items you see there. It says the following points are important to keep in mind. I want to review these with you. I know you can read it, but I want to review it with you so we have a clear understanding. The terms transfers in and transfers out refer to intra-hospital transfers. So that means it's in between different patient units. Transfers in and out of a hospital called inter-hospital or inter-facility transfers are included in admissions and discharges. Transfers in and out of a specific medical care unit may or may not be equal, but they must be equal for the overall hospital summary. Every patient transferred into a unit on a given day must have been transferred out of another unit. So it's important that those patients not get counted twice in two different units. So it's important that they're transferred out of one unit but transferred into another unit. Newborns are considered separately for all computations based on census data. They should be reported separately unless otherwise directed by administration, medical staff, or other persons using this statistical data produced. Births are considered newborn admissions. The census at the close of day, 11:59 p.m., is an inpatient census at the beginning of the next day and is commonly referred to as the number of patients remaining. So the end of the day is 11:59. If they do census at that point, then 2 minutes later or 1 minute later, then they are the next day's beginning census. All right, a few little calculations. They're doing a monthly census at the top. And when we're talking about census, we're talking about people. We're not talking about inpatient. But when we look at the top of page 40, the number of patients in the hospital at 12:01 on October 1st was 48. They added the number of patients admitted during October. That was 100, so we're up to 148. But then we subtract the number of patients discharged in October, 110, and therefore for the whole month of October, the monthly census at 11:59 on October 31st is 38. Typically, we're looking at daily census and looking at trends from day to day. However, we may need to look at trends from month to month. Things change throughout the year. Now, let's look at exercise 3.5. This is an interesting little exercise, and this is one of the odd numbers. So I'm going to pull this in, and let's do a few calculations to show you how to use Excel to calculate. But before I do that, I want to look at these cells that run across the top. They didn't include any formulas, but I want to talk us through it. So At 12:01 a.m., the census is 48, and I'm only going to focus on adult and children. And then how many were admitted? 2 were admitted, 48, 49, 50, but 1 was transferred in, which brings us up to 51. Okay? 1 was discharged, and then 1 was transferred out of the unit. That's 2, so therefore 51 minus 2 is 49. So that's how that census at 11:59 p.m. is calculated. So again, 48 adult children, admitted 2, so I'm up to 50, and 1 was transferred in, bringing me to 51. One was discharged, that brings me down to 50. 1 was transferred out, that brings me down to 49. Now let's look at newborns. We had 2 newborns. We had a birth, therefore we're up to 3 newborns. We had 1 newborn, or 2 newborns discharged, so I'm down to 1, and that's where I'm at right there. Okay? So now what I want to do is I'm actually going to use formulas to do the remainder of this information. And then I'm going to actually, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my fill handle, okay? And then I'm going to use my format painter to create these cells. And now I'm going to show you how Excel can do a lot of the work for you. Okay, so remember what I said, that the 11:59 census becomes the census for the next day, that next day being June 2nd. So therefore, equal that cell goes right there. So you see, I'm pulling from the census at 11:59 p.m. on June 1st, and that number becomes the starting number for the next day. Okay, now I've already been told how many were admitted, discharged, etc. So I'm going to start building the formula. Okay, now I need to also start with my newborn. So equal my newborn, which is cell M4, and now I'm ready to start. So let's think about this cell. In this cell, how do I arrive at the total? Well, that's the adult children plus the ones that were admitted plus the ones that were transferred in. So it's safe to say that this cell is going to be B5 plus B5 plus what was transferred in, F5. So I'm up to 54. Now what about the newborns? Equal newborn plus any births, 2. All right? So let's look at my census at the end of the day. Equal, what was my total, plus, actually minus, excuse me, minus any discharges, minus any that were transferred out. So I'm down to 48. Let's do the same thing with newborn. Equal my newborn minus any newborn discharges. And there we go. Okay. Now, if you look at the top of page 41, this is actually one that you're going to have to do. I'm going to go ahead and fill in some numbers so you can kind of see how this works. I tell you what, I'm gonna finish with 3.5. I was getting ahead of myself. So on 3.5, so far so good. So let's fill in the next row for June 3rd. I'm at the bottom of page 40. Follow along with me. So 1 admitted, 1 birth, 1 transfer. And then 3, 0, and 1. And then, okay. And I'm going to deal with the last column in just a minute, the admitted and discharged on the same day. All right, so right now, all I'm focusing on with this right here is census data. In a minute, I'm going to deal with service days, so I'll come back to that. Okay, so let's continue in this direction. So now I could manually put in those formulas again, but I want to show you something that becomes quite easy. See this little fill handle? If I grab this fill handle and copy it down, look at my number now. What is it referring to? The row before it, that's L5. In Excel, when you use that little crosshairs, that fill handle, and drag it down, it adjusts the formula relative to the row, okay? Same thing here. If I grab my fill handle and copy it down, look where it's referring, to the row before it. Same thing here. I'm going to do both of these at the same time and save myself a little time. And the same thing here. So now look at my formula. Is it indeed subtracting on this row? Hit the escape key. So Excel can do a lot of the work for you. Once you establish your formula, Excel can do the calculations for you. Okay. If I grab this fill handle and copy it down to June 4th, look what it's doing. It's grabbing this cell. Okay. And of course, I need to fill in my additional numbers, but they don't give me any for the rest of the days. Now, I do want to look at 3.6 real quick. This is one of your homework assignments. This is exactly what I was just doing. You're going to build the formula, equal admitted or adult children plus the admitted adult children plus the transferred in to get your total adult children. Same thing with newborn, equal newborn plus births, and there we go, and so on and so on. So when you get out here to the finishing the census, you're going to take your total, you're going to subtract the discharges, subtract the transferred out, and then the same thing for newborn. Newborn total minus the newborn discharges. And now on this next row, this formula is simply going to go grab the adult children from a minute ago to start the next day, and then we continue the process. Okay? All right, I want to go back to this one. And I want to continue talking about what's called service days. Remember, with service days, you have to include any that were admitted discharged. Okay, so therefore, if on 6/1 we had one that was admitted and discharged on the same day, then let me make these look like the rest of them. There you go. Okay, so therefore, if you had one that was admitted and discharged, then the formula is going to be, okay, what was the census plus any that were admitted and discharged on the same day, because we're talking about service days here. Same for newborn. Now, newborn do not have service, or we don't use admitted discharge for newborn. So that's simply going to be whatever the ending census was. If we look here, we had one admitted discharge. So therefore, equal this number plus admitted discharged on the same day. So it's 49. Okay. Now, honestly, I could have just clicked here, grabbed my fill handle and drug it down, and it adjusted the formula relative to the row. Same thing here, and so on. Okay, so let's say we had 2 that were admitted discharged. Again, if I grab my fill handle and drag it down, it's going to automatically calculate based on the row that I copied it to. Okay. All right. So basically, I mean, the formula itself is pretty basic, but the way to be as efficient as possible is using the formulas and also using the fill handle. Okay. All right. I'm going to look at let's see. 3-8 is an exercise that we have to do. And this looks intimidating, but honestly, this is probably the easiest thing that we'll do. And let me show you how easy this is. I just want to drive home the point that using Excel to your benefit. Let me show you how easy this is. So equal adult children plus admitted adult children plus transferred in. Okay, newborn equal newborn plus, even though it's 0, put it in your formula. Okay, this is the hardest part of it all, is just building these little formulas this one time, and I'll show you in a minute. Admitted or adult children minus discharged minus transferred out. Oops, the error in my formula. Okay, let me undo. There we go. Undo. All right, let's try again. Equal the cell minus transfer or discharged minus transferred, and then newborn equal newborn minus, even though it's 0, include it. And then what about the service days? Well, the service days is going to be equal the census number plus the admitted discharge, because remember, if they were admitted and discharged in the same day, they have to be counted. Then newborn equal, and just simply newborn. We don't add or subtract anything. So now let's start the pattern. Okay, so remember, the census at 11:59 p.m. becomes the starting number at 12:01 a.m. for the previous day. So equal that cell. All good. Equal that cell. Okay, so that's coming from the previous day. Now, the next thing I want to do is utilize this formula. Remember, all I've got to do is use my fill handle, and it moves that formula onto that row. Same thing here. Okay, same thing here. Same thing here. And the same thing here and here. Okay, so now what I want to do is I am going to take these 2 cells and I'm going to literally copy them all the way down through the 31st. Okay, don't panic yet. Now I've got to copy these cells down to here. Grab this fill handle all the way down, and then the same thing here. So now we just did a ton of work with just using a formula. So when we look here at the 3rd day, notice that it is the previous day's census. Okay, when I look at my formula, when I look at my formula for day 3, it's calculating based on day 3, and so on and so on. So again, utilizing formulas and utilizing that fill handle creates or saves a lot of work. Then I'll come down here to totals. A total is going to be used by AutoSum. It wraps around the range of cells you want to add and just touch your enter key again. Come here, AutoSum. Looks great. And so on and so on. Now, I could actually use my fill handle at this point to drag all the way across because it's going to adjust based on the column that you copied it to. So again, just learning how to save yourself a lot of time with Excel. So basically, I've done the work for you for that particular exercise that you are going to be assigned. Now, let's talk about the last little formulas. These are pretty basic. Now we're talking about averages. And basically, the average is taking the total inpatient service days, excluding the newborns, unless directed otherwise, and then dividing by the total number of days in the period. So if you're talking about for June, there's 30 days in June. If you're talking about July, there's 31 days in July. So what I recommend to you is that you keep you a little cheat sheet of all the months, and January 31, February 29. I think everything in this book is based on non-leap year unless they tell you otherwise, so be careful to read that. 29 days in February. March has 31, April has 30, May has 31, on and on and on. So have you a little cheat sheet to help you because using 30 days as opposed to 31 days for, let's say, May is going to make your number not correct, okay? So be careful there, because when I grade based on your end result, not based on your intention, okay? So be careful. Now, also notice that it tells you that when you talk about people, you don't use decimal places. So like, for example, on page 43, where you see the daily inpatient census of 214.61, well, since we're talking about people, we have to make that a whole number. So therefore, we're talking about 215 patients. Okay, so when we talk about people, we don't express it in terms of a portion of a person. Over on page 44, we're continuing to talk about getting averages, and basically they're talking about, what did happen, and then divide by what could have happened. So the total inpatient service days based on the total number of days in December. So therefore our denominator becomes 31. The numerator, the top number, is 3489, looking at 112.54, and when you round that, because we're talking about people, it's 113 patients. Okay. So, all right. So basically, that's chapter 3, and nothing major difficult at this point. I think the challenge for some of us might be doing calculations in Excel. So hopefully the demonstration helped you. I will count off if the exercise said to create a formula. You're going to have to learn how to do these formulas. Okay. All right. So I hope this helps you. That was chapter 3.